Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining me today. Great to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Paul.
I understand you've been selling businesses as you often do recently. How did that go?
Yeah, well, it's not finished yet. It's still a work in progress, but long days, but it's all worth the effort in the end.
Yeah, yeah. And you were saying it's been birthday weekend recently?
Yes, yes. So last week was my birthday. Took a little bit of advantage of the bank holiday. Got most of the children together, not all of them. So of the six children, we had four with us, enjoying very happy family afternoon really.
Yeah, good stuff. Good, good. Good to hear it. Well, I think we are live on LinkedIn now and just waiting for people to tune in, Steve. But perhaps you can start by telling us, your background up to the point of joining the SDDE Smith Group.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Steve Padgett. I am a chartered accountant. I qualified in 1996, which makes me sound and feel really old now. Um, I worked in practice, specialised in corporate finance, moved out of practice in the year 2000 when I joined a business that I'd helped to float on AIM. Joined initially as finance manager, but very quickly became the finance director. So I was the finance director of an AIM-listed business at the age of 30. Spent 5 very happy years there. Ultimately built an ethanol plant out of the States, which was a $78 million project. Um, Raised all the financing and put all the commercial structures in place for that. And then I was approached by another client that I'd bought and sold businesses for, who had also been acquired by a PLC. Ended up joining them as the chief executive, and spent 2 years with that listed business as the chief exec. Completed 7 acquisitions, 2 refinancings, a couple of disposals of businesses. And then that business was ultimately sold on to another PLC. So at that point, I started my own consultancy business, Solutions Limited, and I've been doing that for the last 16 years.
Wow. So an interesting baptism of fire in your early career days.
Indeed, yeah, but I've always been ambitious. I think that was it's part of the challenge and part of the benefit, I guess, of someone who's young and ambitious is
Yeah.
you always want to achieve various things in your career. And I've been very fortunate that I've had a couple of good mentors in my career, and I'm now in the privileged position of being able to do that for others.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And you haven't blown your own trumpet there, but I do recall a particular title. Was it youngest CFO, youngest CEO of a
Yeah,
listed business?
I think at one point I was the youngest finance director at the time, not necessarily CFO. But yeah, a listed business on AIM. I was
Yeah.
also one of the youngest CEOs at the age of 35 as well. But
Fantastic, fantastic.
it's
Certainly
a bit of a
sets the
challenge
scene
when
for
you got the
credibility.
dot-com industry that was kicking off at the time.
Yeah, good stuff. Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Steve.
Thank
It'll be
you.
great to find out, obviously, more about your journey and particularly that one which we know of. Obviously, we met with Dale last month, Group CEO of the SDDE Smith Group, and obviously you've joined him as Group CFO. But it'll be certainly interesting to hear about that journey. But what was it that made it appealing about the SDDE Smith Group to join for you, Steve?
Well, initially it's Dale himself, and if you're going to become a CFO of a business, you need to be able to work very closely with the CEO. Dale's a very dynamic individual, very ambitious. I liked his vision. I also liked his approach, which I know you had an involvement in, Paul, in
Mm.
terms of what strategy you used for building the finance team and bringing in whether it was a full-time finance director or it was a fractional CFO with a full-time group financial controller, which was ultimately the route he decided to go down.
Yeah, I think it's maybe version 3, version 4 now, I suppose, as the business has grown and transformed.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good
Absolutely.
stuff. So it was all about personality for you and all about the person you're working with.
Yeah, it's got to work between you become a very close team, and it's important that that chemistry is right to move matters forward.
Yeah,
You go through some good times, and you go through some quite interesting times, more challenging times, and that needs a strength of character and a chemistry that means that you can work together.
yeah, good, good. I'm pleased it's going well. It is from his side as well. He said said similar things last month as well. So
Oh, that's good to know.
yeah, absolutely. So when you go into a business then, Steve, how do you go about setting your priorities and what are the kind of timescales for those priorities?
Well, first thing I do is I almost carry out my own due diligence
Hmm.
process as I'm going into either acquire a business or sell a business. You've got to understand the business itself first before you can even establish what the priorities should be. So that was the first exercise I did. That took obviously a short time to pull together. Also understand what team you're working with, what the various characteristics of each of the businesses within the group are, and what makes them tick, really. So I'd like to mention, obviously, our group financial controller in Reese, who is a guy I've been very keen to work with in the past. Now, fortunate enough, we're working as a team, and he's an integral part of one of the reasons why, the other reason really, that I joined the business, because I knew working with Reese, I could act as his mentor, bring him on to eventually step into, the finance director stroke CFO position eventually.
Yeah.
So it was what we did. We decided to divide and conquer. So I looked after the future. So key for me was getting some really credible integrated financial models put in place, understand what all the KPIs were for the business, what the key drivers were for the business, and build the model on that basis, while Reece looked after the past. So I could then effectively build the forecast on a very solid base.
Yeah. And for those that might not watch the video with Dale, just describe the SDDE Smith Group and therefore the challenges that, harmonious but diverse portfolio of interrelated businesses brings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, effectively, I can break the business down into three parts. There's the initial property business, which was the family business with all the property assets in,
Yeah.
and then led them to go down the holiday letting side of things. Then there's the host and I'll call it host and stay, but it's an accumulation of effectively about 8 different companies that all provide different services. So that's the holiday letting business, and then there's effectively the construction side, and to the side of that, to some extent, we've got the professional services arm, which currently consists of Graysmith Legal.
Yeah. And did you have different priorities for each of those businesses?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, they've all got different characteristics. So the main driver really is the holiday letting side of things. So understanding the key drivers within that business, the fact that it's a sort of an end-to-end service that's provided, which nobody else is doing. So from the facilities management, the onboarding, the marketing side of the business, facilities management, and then effectively offering a service to bring the standard of accommodation up to the right level, which is where the construction and the design side of the business kick in.
Yeah, the styled interiors.
Styled interiors, indeed, yes.
Yeah. For those that might not know, obviously they've recently refurbished one of the suites at the Riverside, which I think is pulling in a lot of new hospitality for Middlesbrough Football Club. Obviously, the SDDE Smith has a partnership there as well, doesn't it? And in addition to Sheffield Wednesday as well.
Indeed, yes, and more to come.
More to come.
So in case I watch this space.
Yeah, good stuff. Nice to hear about that. So from a strategic point of view, and with the company's ambitions, what were your priorities?
Well, it's still a work in progress, but the key priorities is making sure we've got the right financial infrastructure and processes in place to manage the growth of the business. If you haven't got those foundations in place, it can get a bit hairy.
Yeah.
It's best to have those foundations put in place right from the off. Yeah.
What do those foundations look like for you then, Steve, when you're going into a business?
Depends on the nature of the business. I mean, SDDE has operated so far without any facilities at all.
Okay.
When it's turning over what it is, obviously that can become more of a challenge. You can't do everything out of your own resources necessarily. Yeah. So we're just looking at options at the moment in terms of what that might look at in terms of the acquisition strategy. We've got acquisition, we've got organic growth, and those sides of things, and potentially even asset-based lending in there as well. So it's just really, now we've built all the infrastructure in terms of how we can forecast the business more accurately and more appropriately, and use that for the operational side to drive the right behaviour within the business. The rest of it will fall into place.
Yeah, and I know you have a mantra, Steve, don't you? People, process, and profit.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And I suppose if you're looking at priorities in each of those areas, what were they in the early days?
Well, the early days, it was, first of all, to have some credible financial forecast that reflected each of the business in itself, but then on an integrated basis reflected how they all interact with each other. Yeah. So it's difficult to pin down because there's that many varied elements within the business to say, well, actually, this was this and this was that. So
If somebody was in your position, or maybe even in the fortuitous position of making this first step up to a CFO or FD role, if you looked at that planning process, typically what does that look like for you? You know, obviously people will be familiar with 30, 60, 90 days and you know, watch, kind of learn and then
Yeah, I
plan
mean,
from there. How do you go about that?
well, obviously there's a transition process between the incumbent and the new team that have
Yeah,
come in, so that's got to be priority. We're very fortunate in that the incumbent finance director has stayed with the business but moved into a different role and probably one more suited to his long-term ambitions as well.
yeah,
So that was a very smooth process. So initially it was all about understanding where we are, where we're going, and then what if effectively were the key drivers of the business that we could make some initial tweaks that would have a real impact going forward.
yeah. And then in terms of processes, then I suppose what
Yeah,
processes do you
so
have, and what did you see as fit for purpose
well,
in
the
the
business
future?
has been built up organically, so there's lots of different processes for all different areas of the businesses, and as you acquire businesses as well, which we already have done, clearly that adds other elements of sophistication or yeah, complication, shall we say.
Multiple
So
systems
it's all about
is
basically rationalizing some of those processes so they're standardized across the piece. So in
yeah,
terms of our now management accounting function, that's pretty much standardized on one platform. We're introducing a new AP platform, which will be rolled out across the rest of the group, and that interacts with the management accounting system. But the better information you've got and the more standardized systems you've got, the easier it is to report and therefore understand the business at any level.
yeah. And what were some of those quick wins then that you
Yeah, well,
identified?
quick wins. I mean, obviously, this is a very much a family business, so
Yeah,
most decisions have already been made in the past around the dinner table.
yeah,
I was very fortunate in when my appointment and Reese's appointment were made. There were another couple of key additions that were made to the group. So Dale's very much thought about how the shape of the business should be going forward and brought on effectively 5 people at the same time. So that's allowed us to move into much more of a corporate, although still with a family feel to it, a corporate environment where the quickest win was to get some really properly structured board meetings, proper financial reporting back to those boards, and then we can start to make some more efficient changes to the business and improvements to the business.
yeah, yeah. And it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Family businesses. I know Dale, and obviously, yeah, you wouldn't almost perceive it to be a family business, given the rate of change and progress that it's experienced, and that desire to grow and scale, unashamed ambition, really. Have you encountered any other family businesses with other kind of different challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I work with many family businesses, and the SDDE Smith Group doesn't experience this particular issue, but I have worked with families where there's been disputes, and it's about making sure that the business needs effectively outweigh in some respects the family needs,
Yeah,
and you've got to try and separate the two things. Very difficult when it is a family business, but that's one of the things I do very well, or I'd like to think I do very well, is manage conflict
yeah,
and act almost like a mediator.
yeah.
So I've got a range of clients that I've done similar things like that for.
Yeah, and I know one of those has been a transition from a family business, from a father to a son.
Yes.
You know, talk us through that and how you kind of helped that kind of business, and maybe another CFO with that kind of experience might be able to plan for the succession of a family business.
Yeah, I mean that was a really interesting one. That was as you say, a father-son scenario. The son hadn't worked in the business for very long, but had ambitions of taking over the business, and that was very much in line with his father's wishes as well. Wrestling the controls away from the father was perhaps a bit more of a challenge than it would normally be. Well, that's
Yeah,
the nature of the beast, so to speak. But yeah, it's a case of the father had always had a mentor.
yeah,
He wanted someone who his son could relate to, who was perhaps sort of in between his age and the son's age, and I've very nicely slotted into that age range, really. But again, it's all about chemistry and knowing what buttons to press and what people's skills are. So that business has been built around building a new team, processes, systems, procedures that all are there to facilitate growth.
Yeah.
And in fact, that the business I'm referring to completed its first two acquisitions last year. So
Wow.
that's sort of 5 years into a process. We did an MBO to effectively make the son the full owner, and he's gone on to bigger and better things, new premises. The business is about 4 times the size it was when his father had it.
Fantastic. Yeah, great to hear. And I suppose back to SDDE Smith, what
Yes.
was the kind of team support that was required, and what did you identify, when you went in, and the direction of travel where you need to be?
Yeah, well, again, I was very fortunate in that there was a number of other appointments that came in at the same time. So
Mm.
Dale had very much thought about, well, what does the shape of the overall team need to be? But in terms of the finance team, we've effectively built a new team, and thanks to you guys at Paul Card Recruitment, you've definitely assisted in that process. So thank you for that. But we've now got a well balanced team. The team support is in terms of how we're growing the level of information that can be produced on a regular basis, and how consistently that can be produced.
Yeah, and I suppose, what was that transitional period like? Because as you've already described, Ben is still within the business and is now
Yep.
focused on the commercial side and handed over the finance reins to you. But that's quite a bold move, isn't it? And maybe a little unusual to bring in a fractional part-time CFO at the same time as a new full-time financial controller. You've obviously described that you're on the forward-looking strategic piece, and Reece is looking at the backward management reporting. But what were the kind of priorities that you defined for Reece, and what does success look like for him?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of race, having a stable team, having let's say, stable platform to work from, that was absolutely the key. And Ben was instrumental in helping that process to commence. As I said, it's still a work in progress. We're both really only 4 months into this whole exercise, and it's going to be a long-term plan. But in terms of the transition itself, it's been about as smooth as you possibly could. Even though you've got Ben, who's now in his new role and wanting to get started with that, he was patient. Not without its challenges, because obviously I was wanting to go from one direction, and we're trying to say, "Oh, hang on a minute, you just need to get these elements sorted first." But I think I'd like to think we've successfully navigated our way through that now. And in terms of success for Reece going forward, I see him very much being, achieving his ambitions of being an FD or a CFO, certainly within the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. And do you think that fairly significant change in the finance function was helped by the fact that the whole management team was restructuring?
It definitely helped, because change at any time is always a challenge.
Yeah.
People don't like change, do they? Very often. But the fact that it was such a big change and so many people, we've actually worked really well as an overall team, and that's why for me, getting that board together and get the functions, the accountability and responsibility put in the right place, it all came together really nicely.
Yeah. And as you say, almost, if you're in the SDDE Smith group, you're constantly changing, you're constantly evolving. Change is part of the nature of the enjoyment of the business, and if change isn't for you, it's probably not the right company to be in.
Well, indeed, yes. Yeah, never a straight edge, but always
No.
exciting.
And I suppose change is an interesting concept, as you absolutely say. The majority of people, 99 out of 100, I would suggest, probably don't like change. So when you've gone into another organisation, how do you encourage that culture of change as a CFO, as an FD?
It's all down to the people. It's ultimately all down to the people. And if you can get people to engage in processes, engage in what the business is actually trying to achieve,
Yeah.
you do that through. It's man management. It's no more complicated than that. I say it's no more complicated than that. I'm not suggesting it's particularly easy, but it is all about how you build a team and how you engage people.
And for an inexperienced manager, what would you say is the best way to do that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course.
Paul?
For an inexperienced manager, or somebody who might be on that upward trajectory of their finance career right now, watching this video,
Yeah.
what's the best way that you've won people over, and having gone into an organisation where your brief is to drive change? How do you win those? How do you win those people over?
Best way to do it is sit down and understand what makes them tick. If you understand what makes them tick, you can automatically adjust your behaviour to mirror theirs, or at least encourage their behaviour in the right way. Lots of books out there. Read things. Look at who an appropriate mentor would be, where you can learn these things from. They're all out there. So I was very fortunate. I've had 2 or 3 really good mentors in the past, and I've learned from them. And so hopefully I can pass that on to others.
So I know one of your famous sayings is start with the end in mind. So
Yes.
what do you want the outcome to be? And that's something that always sticks with me. Who is it that came up with that phrase then? Who did you learn that one from?
Well, to be honest, that's something I came up with myself, just by working with others. Everyone has their own mantra, don't they? But that's for me. If you don't know where you're going, how do you know where to start? It's as simple as that.
But often I reflect on that several times a week. What do we want the outcome to be? What are we looking to do here in any day-to-day decision? What are we actually trying to achieve? What's the behaviour we want to change? What do we want to encourage? What are we looking for here? I know you've been a mentor for me, Steve, and that's
the other one
really
I'd say, Paul, is what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
So if you understand the problem you're trying to solve first, then you know how we get the answer.
Yeah. So I suppose reflecting on your career and that at SDDE Smith, you've already talked about that there was a huge option available for them. FD, CFO, financial controller. They were obviously looking to, get best value for money. But there's a couple of questions here. Maybe the first one is, fundamentally, what do you see as the difference between a CFO and an FD? And naturally, this is something that I discussed with Dale in terms of how does he hire and how does he use that budget and what's right for business. But if you were looking at it, Steve, what would you say as the fundamental differences between an FD and a CFO?
Yeah, there's not a huge difference, but the main difference is the CFO will look at things more strategically, probably has a wider base of experience that they can draw upon, probably has been and seen more change than a finance director. And I've been a finance director and CFO, so I know the difference between the two roles. There's more responsibility that you take on as a CFO, and it's as I say, it's almost a symbiotic relationship you have to have with the CEO in order to achieve the right objective.
Yeah. And what advice would you want to give then to a finance director now who wants to elevate their career to that next level and CFO?
Yeah, I mean, look for a business that's actually going places, or gives you the opportunity to get a wider experience. If you've never bought a business before, that's a really interesting process to get and be involved with, whether it's on the buy side or on the sell side. Transactional management is all about project management and understanding risk. So risk is a key area that I think is a differential between being a CFO and being a finance director.
Mm-hmm. Accepting of that risk, or?
Well, yeah. I mean, well, first of all, you've got to understand what risks you're taking on, but understanding what the implications of that are. That's absolutely essential. What you tend to find, and this is no disrespect to anyone who's currently in a finance director role, what you tend to find is you're more interested in the transactional, the day-to-day, and the reporting elements than necessarily what the strategic implications of what you're trying to achieve are.
Yeah. And if somebody is watching this and maybe a financial controller, even finance manager level, maybe even a newly qualified accountant, saying, okay, how do I get my career to that next level? What would you say to somebody that wants to become an FD, and what's their growth journey, and what advice would you give to your younger self, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, go through some pain. You got to look at you may have failures in life in whatever element, but learn from them, understand the reasons why things might go wrong, but also celebrate your successes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
just as important, if not more important, to take those successes and think, well, how can I apply what I've learned today or what I've learned with this experience? Is how can I apply that in the future, which might actually have a bigger impact on the business that I'm working with.
Yeah, good stuff. And I suppose if there was a business owner, MD, CEO watching this video, Steve, what advice would you give them about the value that a CFO can bring to an organisation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one, Paul, because being and I've obviously advised lots of MDs as well. Being an MD of a business can be quite a lonely place. So having someone who is not necessarily an equal in role within the business, but an equal in terms of either experience or background or understanding, who can bring a different slant on things, more from a financial and commercial perspective than just pure entrepreneurial spirit and drive. Having that balance within the team is really important. But it also brings with it some challenges, because more than likely a CFO will be more challenging with the CEO than an FD might be. So yeah, it might be a bit a case of be careful what you wish for, but the benefits certainly outweigh some of the potential downsides.
Yeah, and when would be the right time for a business to look to appoint an FD or a CFO? Obviously, it's part of the growth journey, but what would you say are the key indicators or pains that a CEO and MD business owner might be experiencing to know that now is the right time to invest in that next level of financial expertise?
Yeah, it's again, great question, Paul. You've got the balance between an MD who has to wear lots of hats. When the finance element of that sort of strain becomes too much, that's absolutely the time to do that. But planning ahead, it depends on the complexity of the business, depends on the level of transactions that are going through. Lots of people work as MDs with outside advisors. When that becomes inefficient, that's also the time to bring somebody in-house.
Yeah, absolutely. And was there one sliding doors moment in your career, Steve, that you think, actually, fact, if I'd have turned right, it'd have been completely different to when I turned left?
Yeah, I can pinpoint that really accurately, actually. And it's 31st of December 1999. So I had the choice of going one direction, which was to become the finance manager, then ultimately the finance director of a PLC, or stay in practice and maybe even become, the head of the practice at one point. So a senior partner, certainly partner within the practice. I didn't actually achieve that bit, but I've turned the corner that took the PLC route, and yeah, I'm pleased I did, because I think I've got a much broader outlook on life and a financial experience to boot.
Good stuff. And one final question, Steve. What would be the younger advice, or what would be the advice that you would give to your younger self?
Oh God, go for it. Just
Yeah,
go for it. Don't be afraid to take a calculated risk. Let's put it that way, a calculated risk. Yeah.
super stuff. Well, brilliant, Steve. Thanks for being so open. Thanks for sharing the secrets of your success. We'll look forward to watching, obviously, the continued progress of SDDE Smith Group with yourself at the helm. Thanks for joining me today. And
Thank you very much.
we'll wish you all the very best in the near future. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Paul.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers now.